Now let's continue with our distinguished panel. Ivan Krastev, Chairman, Center for Liberal Studies, and Albert Hirschman, Permanent Fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. Gábor Scheiring, Assistant Professor of Comparative Politics at Georgetown University, Qatar. Maciej Kisilowski, Associate Professor, Faculty Director, CEU. And Raluca Nicoleta Radu, Professor, University of Bucharest. And the moderator will be Ebru Özbey, Co-Managing Director, Review of Democracy.
Good afternoon and welcome to this panel session. We have a very ambitious program ahead, so I say let's start right away and let's start with a question for the audience. Would you care to make a guess regarding how many times we have heard the word populism since this morning? Any guesses? 68? I think less. Good. 50. Plot twist is that I don't know the answer. I had to leave the room a couple of times, but I reached 30, minus Ivan's keynote speech. And that's the thing, isn't it? Few concepts are as attention-grabbing, as important, but also as inflammatory as populism in today's political vocabulary. Just say the word, and you are sure to spark a reaction, positive or negative, but almost certainly a big one. And that is because for some, populism signals democratic decay, polarization, illiberal tendencies, and it's a threat to democracy. Whereas for others, although a minority, it actually represents a return to the authentic voice of the people, representation of the will of majority, a true chance to recover, reinvent democracy, even when it's entangled with radical right, autocratic, illiberal leaders. This is precisely the angle that I think we should focus on today. Because it's almost amusing to recall that not too long ago, just 2 years in 2023, the number of populist leaders worldwide actually had fallen to a 20-year low. Do you remember that? And some people took it as a signal that the so-called populist surge might have actually crested. Others, myself included, were more skeptical, and indeed the crowded election year of 2024 proved that skepticism right. The results were mixed, but populists have shown themselves to be extremely resilient to hold on to that power, whether through re-election or comeback. So this is the part that I would like to focus on, if possible. That little word in the title, but a very significant one, hidden in between, tucked away in between brackets, back to the office. So we will, of course, be talking about the popular base, support for populism, but I'm particularly curious about how they hold on to power, how they get re-elected over and over, and when they happen to lose an election, what makes them to come back so easily? So, Ivan, thank you so much for this wonderful keynote speech and thoughtfully setting up the stage for our discussion. If possible, I would like to hear a few words from you to complement the speech before we move on to the questions and discussion. Would you like to?
Yes. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm coming from the University of Bucharest. I'm part of the doctoral school, and I just want to share with you that at some point, one of our students decided she's going to analyze populist discourses during elections. And when she was talking about what she wanted to do, we realized that every politician, when he or she is trying to get elected, is using something that is very close to a populist discourse. So she would have no thesis if she would go in that direction, because everyone is a populist if he or she needs to. And I'm very sorry to say this, knowing that there are politicians in the room, but we are facing this reality from the academia point of view, on one hand. On the other hand, maybe you know, we had this incredible example last year, at the end of last year, when nobody was thinking he might become the Romanian president, won the lion's share in the first round of elections. And he had a discourse that was incredible. I mean, even the people that voted for him knew he was lying or he was saying stupid things. And that would be very close to what we would say it's a populist discourse. And we were very close to have him president. Maybe we are still very close to have him president in the next elections. But we had extremely intelligent journalists that searched for his links to whomever supported him. And because we are very close to the war in Ukraine, we had intelligence agencies in Romania and in Europe that tried to understand how come somebody that nobody credited to become the president was so close to winning the elections. We know that something was going on social media. We know that he was pushed in 2 weeks on TikTok. We know that people that had no intention to go to vote went to vote and voted for him. But we also know that there were some people that followed him for years, also on social media, that are not open to academics, like on WhatsApp. And here, nobody can help us. I mean, the European Union can help open databases from Facebook or from TikTok or from X, but cannot help open databases from WhatsApp, that is close social media. So we understood what happened in a very short time, like in 1 week, and that was did never happen before. And what I can put here on the table now is that, okay, most of them are populists when they want to be re-elected, but we have to understand what is behind their discourse and what their hidden agenda is. And if they have ties to some interest groups, or in his case, to some paramilitary groups, or to money that are in large sums and are pushed by maybe economic interest, but also maybe state interest and foreign state interest and interests that are tied to war. And this we can do only if we have a strong media and we have kind of a functioning democracy. So, well, we have populist discourses and we have people that would vote for whomever they want to vote, but we have to look behind those discourses. Who are these people and what are the ties that are of interest for everyone that is going to live in that country or is going to live in some sort of union with that country.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Ece, for emphasizing the conceptual dimension of the problem, because I really think this is essential to answer the question on the slide. Why? Because imagine we are in the late 1950s, sitting in Italy or France, and reflecting how populists have swept across Europe and Asia after World War II. So, these so-called populists, we say to each other, just brutally pacified Budapest. But we reassure ourselves, surely they are not a serious ideology, right? Look, we say, just consider the difference between populist Khrushchev, populist Kim Il-sen, populist Gomulka, and populist Tito. Not to mention their allies in our own Western countries, yes? Surely we reassure ourselves what unites them is only a style. Authoritarian habits, propaganda, clever use of technologies. They're really good at television, which just have transformed politics, and we liberals are so bad at it for some reason. I mean, imagine if the West truly embraced this absurd theory of populism back then to conceptualize its greatest adversary of the time. I don't think democracy would have prevailed in the Cold War. And yet today, 10 years after the new authoritarianism came to the world stage, and in Hungary 15 years after, we still refuse to see our adversaries for what they really are. They are not a style, they are not a syncretic movement, they are devoted proponents of a serious, coherent, and deeply attractive ideological alternative to liberal democracy. We bizarrely fail to see that revolutionary conservatism, which is only seemingly oxymoronic, is every bit as serious as the revolution Marxism was before. Now, I happen to spend the last big part of the last 6 years working with 27 great Polish intellectuals, both liberals and, very importantly, revolutionary conservatives themselves. We wrote a book together, which actually a little promotion came in English by Oxford this week. But I really engaged in this project because I wanted to understand what they really want. And I think I do understand what they want. So read the book if you want to understand too. But critically, the book originally published in Polish in 2023 for an edited volume on political theory, it became an unlikely non-fiction bestseller, which is an achievement in itself. And politicians took note. We spoke with many liberal politicians, but they failed to act on our diagnosis. The spell of the end of history, of not treating the enemy or adversary, we should say more politely, as a serious ideological competitor, proved much stronger than our little patriotic effort. Donald Tusk's team is fully into anti-populist mode, and the result you will see in 27, barring some last-minute miracle, you will have Kaczynski free, just like you have now Trump too. So, dear Hungarian friends, be smarter than the Poles. Because especially since your own opposition leader, Peter Maciej, seems to actually grasp the nature of the adversary. I mean, his strategies, to the extent I understand it, is to counter with a moderate, domesticated version of revolutionary conservatism, which is a tried and tested strategy. Social democracy was that to communism what Peter Maciej is to Viktor Orban, yes? So please help Peter by making this the very last panel on why populists are winning, and the very first panel on a serious discussion of why revolutionary conservatism is appealing to a large group of our compatriots. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here discussing a less pleasurable topic. And I would like to follow up on what many of the previous panelists have been talking about, especially Ivan, how this is a truly systemic crisis, a moment of systemic crisis that we have been, or mainstream analysts of populism have been underappreciating, I believe. And just let me point out a few of these symptoms of the crisis that are driving, I think, or mainly responsible for the rise of populism that we have failed to properly understand and treat at its weight. One is, and these are all interrelated with each other, so it's not just like an additive thing. These are all related to the way in which companies, corporations, make decisions about how they make money and how they organize the economy around that, but it doesn't mean that populism is just an economic issue. But it's, at the end of the day, it's really crucial to understand that that's the kind of, a lot of the changes that we see around the world from technology in politics is revolving around that big question. So that, I think the first that we need to understand is that there's what I call a triple devaluation. A devaluation of people's economic worth. We're seeing stagnating real wages from the United States, also to Germany. We don't talk about Germany, but if you look at the statistics of Germans without a college degree, their real wages have been stagnating also. a Hungarian middle class earning around a middle class income, their income went back to where it was in 1980, around 2016 under Viktor Orban's regime. So that's almost 3 decades of real income stagnation. That's one sign. Labor market precarity, even in the most advanced countries, from Scandinavia to many other parts of the world, Brazil, labor market insecurity is a huge part of economic devaluation. But when your income is devalued, when your economic status is devalued, also your skills and your lifestyle, your whole worlds of being in the world are devalued as well. So that's the second part, a cultural devaluation. And I would like to stress that these are interrelated. So I'm not talking about the culture backlash, which is, I think, a really misleading theory. It's not about racist white men who are primarily driving populism. That's also part of the problem. But if you look at the recent elections in Japan, you will see that a lot of frustrated young people have voted for a new radical right populist challenger. If you look at AfD, you see a lot of young people. So it's not just older white racist men. So there's this culture devaluation, a complete loss of skills that are getting devalued, the collapse of ways of life, communities, working class communities, and this sense of meaninglessness and alienation in these late capitalist societies. Which leads to the third point, which is a sense of loss of political voice. Right? So the crisis of representation is again related to how political elites have become pushed closer to globally free-floating economic elites, outsourced policymaking to expert bodies, whereas previously party platforms have been more or less constructed through internal party processes, now your messages are being bought from experts from outside. There's just one aspect in which everyday people's sense of having a say in how politics and policies are being made is eroding. So it's this kind of transformation of liberal democracy into a undemocratic liberalism is very much part of the people's sense of loss of political voice. So this is the triple crisis, but that's in itself, of course, not enough. So I think the inability of analysts to understand populism is also related to the inability of centrist politics and centrist political elite to respond to it. So that's also part of the problem. The denigration, the elitism, very often the dismissive attitude of this real suffering that is going on in people's lives. That's a huge problem. And that centrist politics has really become a politics that is trying to defend the status quo and not trying to present itself as a transformative force that offers democracy 2.0. A democracy that is a democracy for everyone, where everyone can feel at home. Currently, a lot of people are asking, if liberal democracy doesn't care for me, why should I care for liberal democracy? So that's what we need to understand, and that's how we need to redefine, I think, democratic politics. And populists, illiberal radical right populists especially, have become really clever at selling their politics as the answer. I don't think that's the answer, but they have at least asked transformative questions. Whereas democratic politics has forgotten the skill of asking transformative questions. And they use mostly symbolic politics to pretend that they have the answers, but that's at least something, and that's many people find attractive. So I think this of course, very complex constellation of factors, the triple devaluation, the loss of centrist politicians' ability to respond to this multifaceted crisis, and the emergence of a new kind of radical transformative politics from the radical right, and that's I think what we need to understand. And of course, there's no such thing as the populist voter. There are multiple types of populist voters who respond to these different sorts of things. So it's not just poor people, you know. In many cases, you're talking about working class people. In many cases, you're talking about middle class people. Some of them would respond to economic messages. Some of them would respond to culture messages. And the question is, how the illiberal radical right has developed this ability to create a really broad social coalition of, in various ways, devalued and dissatisfied electorates. So I think that's the question that we ask and then have to ask and hopefully answer as well.
I hope you can, yes, hear me. Perfect. Thank you so much for these thought-provoking remarks. I just realized something. Because we started a bit late, I rushed everything and did not even welcome you all. So please join me in welcoming our brilliant panelists. I would like to highlight one thing. It is an exceptionally interdisciplinary panel. We have comparative politics, political economy, law, communication studies, so it's going to be a good discussion. I can sense that. So we have already heard a lot of interesting points regarding the conceptual nuances of populism and how it is actually a very attractive alternative to liberalism. The different factors that drive different manifestations of populism and how it tends to be contagious, how mainstream actors are following suit, and we are getting more and more populism infiltrating in mainstream politics. And of course, going back to one of your original points during the speech, how we actually expected populists to perform badly, how we expected their governments to be short-lived and proven wrong very strongly. So this discussion can go into all directions. What I would like to do is to bring it back to my original point, this keyword, back to the office. To me, it indicates two scenarios. We have talked about this. One is that populists continue to get re-elected, consolidating power while in office. And the second one is coming back, bouncing back after an electoral loss. And because I would like to get some questions from the audience as well, I know this is everybody's favorite topic, at least one of them, so I know you would like to be a part of the conversation. I thought I could give you two questions, divide them among you, and then I will have a third one, but I will come back to that later. So my first question is about how populists actually exploit power when they are in the office. What I mean by that is, we can assume that the performance of populists, the tangible deliverables, whether it's welfare or security-related issues, might get them re-elected. I'm talking about durability here, continuous re-election, these long governments of populists, like we have in Turkey, in some other countries. I'm not going to name names. So we can assume that it's their performance, which would be a naive assumption, or it can be something that has to do with, change of institutions, decaying of norms, amendments to constitutions, infiltration to the mainstream or social media, whatever you would like to, mention here. Ivan, would you like to start, perhaps?
I will start because I do believe that there is a certain consensus which is coming out of the whole speakers. And one is that probably in the way we retired the word transition as a concept that helps us much, retiring populism is going to help. Because obviously we see a much deeper transformation, which means that a certain new consensus are emerging. Listen, 10 years ago, and the economists in the room, people who were talking about industrialization were perceived as coming from another era. Now, tell me who, populist, post-populist, left, right, are not talking about industrialization. In a certain way, there is a really very few who defend kind of a free trade system. And you're going to see that regardless of what's going to happen, who's going to win or lose the elections in places like the United States, certain changes has come and they're not going to be reversed. The same, by the way, is about migration. Have you heard recently somebody in a position of power defending opening borders? People are saying how they want to regulate it. They said that you need certain type of migrants. It's a major difference between people who totally want to close the borders, which, by the way, nobody did. Because one of the interesting things is that you're going to see that while the discourse is changing, in many of the countries in which anti-migrant parties came to power, the number of the people who are entering the country has not changed or has increased. Italy under Meloni is the biggest example of this. But the discourse has changed dramatically. So from this point of view, obviously we're in a new situation, and the word revolutionary was used. Two things about this. Revolutions means that the changes of identities of all players has changed. The moment you're changing the nature of the Republican Party of the United States, believe me, you're also changing the nature of the Democratic Party. because you're responding to a totally different reality. The moment the nature of the United States is changing, it is changing basically the identity of everybody else, and European Union is a great example of this. So, and secondly, what in my view is totally new is, before so-called populist national conservative right was very much a response to globalization. After Trump coming to power, it is becoming a global movement. We have some data coming from the ECFR, which Pavel was presenting, which shows that in a certain way, the relations towards President Trump is becoming a critical, basically, in the way to try to distinguish between political parties. But here comes the story. There was a lot of people in the liberal center who believes that this is also an opportunity for the liberals to become the new sovereignists. And it can work. It worked in very particular conditions. It worked in Canada, because the United States and President Trump basically threatened the very sovereignty of the country. It works in Denmark for the same reason. But if you're not in these places, anti-Trumpian discourse is not going to be enough. And one of the things that has changed also dramatically, and Poland is a great example of this, you have a country which has experienced existential threat from outside. This is recognized by everybody in the political space. And nevertheless, it does not produce any political unity. So there is a presidential candidate in the room. You normally, historically, we know that when there is an external threat, it should produce certain type of consolidation. It is not producing consolidation. And I'm saying that this is all these new realities, and when you are saying how they're governing differently. We should be also fair to some of these parties. Many of these parties came to power and after that lost power in elections. Even some very nasty characters recognize that they lost elections. So from this point of view, while they have been very much misusing instruments of power, when they have been in power, they didn't went to the major kind of a source of legitimacy of democratic game in these elections. There was places like Brazil where obviously Mr. Bolsonaro has a different idea. And the first story is how of these two are going to go. And you give the example of Turkey. Country very much to challenge this. Secondly, being in opposition to a national conservative government in power is not fun. And for very simple reasons, because of understanding of Schmittian understanding of politics us versus them, in a certain way, no institutions can be recognized as a neutral institution. Either you're with me or against me. This is it. And this understanding of politics, of course, is changing the logic of the game. I'm saying this because Michael Ignatieff, very well known in this building recently, wrote an article in which he quoted a famous French liberal from the end of the 18th century, when late in his life he was asked, what did you do during the high days of the French Revolution? He said, I survived. And this is an important statement because liberalism was particularly strong on the way to a revolutionary change, particularly being very much part of the reformist elites opening of the system. And after the excesses of the revolution, where you're basically trying to tame and to save what can be saved out of the distractions, but in the high day of the revolutions, during the terror and so on, you have not heard many basically liberal names around. And this is a change because both sides are creating this type of antagonistic politics. And this is why capturing of the institutions is becoming the name of the game. This is the name of the game. Basically, you're either putting your people or you're putting other people. And one of the stories, and by the way, this is one of the things talking about the voters. I have been talking quite a lot to the Trumpian voters. And one of the things that they like about Trump is that he's blunt about this. He said he's not lying about the nature of power. And the nature of power is, are you winning or are you losing? And this is changing everybody. And this is why I'm saying this, because it's going, the most difficult is the rule of law, respect for rights is going to come back after you're seeing certain excesses. They cannot come easily simply because the liberals has winning the elections. And I do believe this is what they're learning when they come back to power. But let's stop because there are other people saying much more interesting things.
Yes. So just briefly, I'd like to highlight one set of factors from populist governance, which is a break with technocratic policymaking. And deep down in my heart, I really like quantitative research and I like quantifying social problems, but that can be misleading as a political tool, and also can be misleading as a way to assess the efficiency of populists in power. Because they not just or primarily not govern from the perspective of technically solving existing problems. Very often they govern politically, right? So with symbolic goals in mind and with the goal of maintaining or forging social coalitions. So if you look at Turkey and the politicized mega projects, they are tools for patronage, but they're also tools for portraying Erdogan as a president who builds the country. Duterte's program partly was build, build, build. Macedonia, North Macedonia under Gruevski. A lot of building going on, financed by EU money. Orban with his stadiums, also partly for patronage, but also to portray these leaders as active people who are investing in their country, as opposed to uncaring liberal elites who, I don't know, fail and want to leave it to the markets or whatever. And that's a huge issue because, again, they are presenting themselves as transformative people, as transformative forces. And they even managed to portray this alliance between loyalist economic elites and the political party as a nationalist project that is part of building the country. Hence, corruption is, you really need to be greedy, like nowadays in Hungary, for that to backfire. Because for a long period of time, it can come across as a legitimate project of rebuilding the country. I'm not endorsing this, but I'm just trying to understand the political logic behind it. So I think it's understanding governance from the perspective of politics and not necessarily from the perspective of technical efficiency, and trying to understand the grand logic behind it. Very often we try to dismiss populists and liberals as kind of, they should collapse because they're so contradictory, but there are these really underlying logics that I think sustain them in power. And if liberal elites only concentrate on protecting democracy 1.0, which led to a lot of frustrations that previously many of you also mentioned, then this always gives a chance for populists to come back to power.
If you would like to comment on this first question, you are more than welcome to do so, but I would like to give you a second one. I would like to come back to this theme of comeback, because as long as they perform relatively well, or at least sustain that narrative, populists manage to get re-elected. But what happens if they lose the power and have to climb up their way back to the office? I'm particularly interested in, say, self-victimization, blaming of the elite, appeals to the election results, this use of populist rhetoric to once again portray themselves as underdogs or suppressed voice of people. Again, you can start with the first question, but I would love to hear more on this one as well.
Okay, I'll try to cover more ground. How do they stay in power? I would answer with two concepts: state capture and media capture. There was a little bit of talk of state capture. You change the rules, and then you can stay in power because you change the rules to stay in power. It's also linked to vote control, and I'm not going to talk about any other country. I can talk about Romania, and we saw the biggest party controlling votes and giving votes to one of the opponents to change the end results, and then recognizing it publicly that they shift votes. So it's state capture, I'm changing the rules, I'm dissolving agencies that are bothering me, vote control and media capture, because media is the last one holding the power into account. And we can see media capture everywhere in Europe. And this is why, again, the European Union tried to change the rules about media and how politicians can buy media and what you can do with budget money around media. How do they come back? There was a lot of talk about far right rising in Europe. I'm now I'm part of two research projects. One is the Digital News Report, and we look at digital audiences around the globe, and we saw that during the COVID pandemic, everyone around the globe turned to social media, and now the main source of news is social media. This is good on one hand because you are exposed to media brands you would not use in normal life, but this is bad because social media is pushing you to the extremes. You know what the other is thinking, but you think that the other is a stupid person and you cannot talk to the stupid one. So this is Digital News Report. And another project is Prompt. Prompt is financed by the EU, and we are trying to use artificial intelligence to follow disinformation online, because we are part of several countries, East and West, and we discovered that the far right is talking in the same way, but in our languages, and it's the same narratives that are traveling around and that are pushed around, and you cannot use anything human. You have to use artificial intelligence to follow these narratives. And well, EU is trying to do something because national governments would not be able to do something about it. So they come back to power using narratives that somebody else is think of. They translate it in their own language. They adapt it to their own national realities, and they all say the same thing, that we are a great country and the others don't understand them, don't understand us. I have a very strange example. One of our far-right leaders was just in London during a anti-migration meeting. Romanians are maybe the second or the third migrants in Great Britain. And it was very strange to have a Romanian supporting an anti-migration meeting. But in their logic, it's normal because people moving around that are Europeans are not migrants. They are moving normally around. They were against people coming from outside Europe. And you have to be inside their logic to understand what is going on, but a lot of people are kind of understanding that logic and are going to vote for them even if they understand that what these people propose is not reasonable and is not doable and it's maybe stupid.
So if you paid attention to my previous statement, you will not be surprised that I disagree. How populists exploit power is like a drug. It comes from this old literature, even on Latin America, on populism. The studies of populism, as I explained, will come down as the greatest dead end in political thought in many, many decades. So this idea that populists are against constraints and that's why they are winning makes no sense empirically because of your second question. If it's because of the state capture, then why are they coming back when there is no state capture? In 2020, Trzaskowski lost with all the media held by revolutionary conservatives, and in 2025, he also lost, even though all the media were pretty fast and efficiently, actually, in this case, as you know, Ivan. In this case, actually, Tusk did act fast and efficient. Not, some people said not fully legal. I actually said it was legal. But let's leave that aside. And even though the media were not captured by revolutionary conservatives, a revolutionary conservative won again the presidency, almost by the same percentage, by the way. I really think that every minute we spend on deliberating on how they abuse their power and capture is a minute lost on a more serious discussion, which is why they are attractive. And they are attractive because hierarchies that they are promising to reintroduce and sometimes manage to effectively reintroduce are actually not that bad for many people, especially people who are on the top, but even the people who are in the middle of the hierarchy. And if you think about the very thoughtful points and trends that Ivan brought to the discussion, yes, if in a few years all the clean white-collar work will be done by robots, and then the state will decide whether you can do a fake white-collar job and get a salary, or do you need to work on a construction site which still will not be done by robots, then you are, maybe you will be tempted by a hierarchical vision of a society in which your white kids who are now kind of integrated into the British society, even though they had Romanian parents, will maybe cut the threshold for doing a fake white-collar job, and the black and brown people will do the construction site work, yes? So a long puzzle that we express about anti-immigrant sentiment of Eastern European workers comes down to a very simple thing. Racial hierarchy is good for white people, yes? If you are a man, you may want to be again treated as someone better than a woman, yes, and have the freedom to act on this privilege. So if the climate change worsens, the state will again, the pie will get smaller, there will be natural disasters. Who will be the ones who will be helped by the government if natural disaster strikes? Again, hierarchy may be attractive. So again, I really think it's well, as a lawyer, I can tell you many stories how they abused power in Poland and in other countries. Of course they abused power. You know, for communists, coming back to my original analogy, the Red Army stationing throughout Eastern Europe certainly helped to establish this ideology, yes? But Western intellectuals were smart to understand that it wasn't only the barrels of Red Army soldiers, yes, and the tanks of Red Army soldiers, that there were millions of peasants who wanted agrarian reform, yes? And we also need to understand that the revolutionary conservative vision has certain groups of people, demographics, categories, segments, that will be attracted to it. And that's why they are winning when they are in power. That's why they are winning when they are not in power. Because what they are selling is fundamentally attractive.
Thank you so much. We have 10 minutes left, and I have a third question. And it is going to be about something that cuts these two scenarios, cuts across these two scenarios, which is that this sustainable demand for populism, the fact that these grievances populists tap into just don't go away. They cannot, I mean, populists cannot come back to the office, come to the office or come back to the office unless there is support, right? So the question I know is too broad, but I will try to narrow it down a little bit and bring anti-populism aspect back, because in the welcoming speech, if you remember, there was a sentence by the mayor stating that we need to fight populists with their own weapons. I think that was the word that was used. But okay, on the one side, if mainstream is tapping into populism themselves, they are becoming the part of the problem. If they are taking up on this sardonic, condescending attitude, it alienates some segments of the voters. So what to do? On a more rhetorical, on a more political competitional aspect. But I think this would be a nice question to wrap up the entire conversation. So I will give you a couple of minutes to think about it. I'll raise it, I'll pin it, and I'll turn to our audience for a couple of questions before we wrap up. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'd like to get back to the keynote speech and the whole talk about the key in the door, because I was curious, have you seen any centrist politicians being able to talk about this homelessness, to address this homelessness that you describe as the driving factor behind the populism of today?
Would you like to collect a couple of more so that we can save some time.
Yes, Carsten Schneider, sorry, I have the microphone. CEU, thank you. That's very illuminating. You make a couple of statements that I agree with, but they're in contradiction somehow, and I'm sorry for plagiarizing something Tom Carothers was saying years ago on the stage. So if on the one hand, what populists offer is so attractive, but at the same time we agree that they tilt the level playing field, why are they doing this? So why are they not winning on an open market? So this is true for the Chinese, this is true for populists. So I don't get that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is picking up primarily on Professor Kisilowski's point. What was missing from the discussion is authoritarianism. Some, but not all, of the people lumped in as populists are an authoritarian threat, just like some, but not all, are an ideological, revolutionary, conservative threat. Now, an authoritarian wins if they are in power and loses if they are out of power. But an ideology can also be winning if its proponents are not in government. Farage's ideology is winning when Starmer delivers the Island of Strangers speech. So how do you navigate the sort of the contradictions and conflicts of interest in fighting these two things at the same time?
If it's working now. I'm not going to talk about the world or other countries. I'm just going to talk about Romania. We need to keep, the powerful in account. We need to ask them to explain what they're doing, and we need to keep citizens interested in what the process is looking like. Because if you lose the citizens, it doesn't matter if you have a strong opposition or if you have a strong media that is doing investigative reporting or stuff like this. If you lose the citizens, then you lose the battle. You need to keep the conversation going in real life and in social media, and to build a public space, because every party has a reason to represent some interests, and some interests are legitimate, but some interests are not legitimate, and you need to have a strong judiciary to cut into the illegitimate interests. This is what we have to do. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's clear cut from my point of view. And yes, we have very strange people saying very strange things. We need to expose those strange things. Like, we had really strange things like, we can save Romanian economy with the horse. Let's focus on the horse. And water is not water. Water is also information. You have to expose these things. They were told in a very, low voice by a person that is a sportsman and is looking good. The suit is really good on him. And people were just amazed by how good he was looking and what deep voice he has. And I don't think this is just a Romanian case. This is happening everywhere. People that are looking good say stupid things, and we just have to expose those stupid things to everybody and keep the discussion going in the, so that citizens know what they are voting for and where they are heading. It is just as simple as this thing, I think.
I want to address Professor Schneider's question, excellent question. And I would argue that the analogy I suggested today is again helpful to respond, because in my view the reason why revolutionary conservatives are turning immediately to authoritarian means is that they are overestimating our strength, the liberal strength. They are actually paranoid about our strength, very much like Marxist revolutionaries of the 20th century were paranoid about the strength of capitalism. And they also turned to authoritarian means partly because, of course, there are segments, I emphasize, the hierarchies that revolutionary conservatives are proposing are good for segments of society, and for segments of society, our liberal equality will still be preferable. So they know this, but they are paranoid because, just like the Marxists came after, the total domination of capitalism of the 19th century, the revolutionary conservatives are coming after the end of history, so they are seeing us as this omnipresent, omnipotent, the Soros, famous Soros analogy illustrates that. And I think they overshoot. In Poland, I do believe Kaczynski would have been winning without taking over the courts. Actually, the courts hurt him in many ways because there are some moderate conservatives who are going to support the revolutionaries, but again, the analogy still holds, like social democratic voters in the previous Cold War. So I think there is a hope, if I'm right, then there is a hope to convince our revolutionary conservative compatriots that they don't need to be authoritarian, that they are actually quite a strong and compelling camp, with which I, for the record, passionately disagree. I'm very liberal. But that they have a chance in free and fair election, that they don't need to do this, what they do in Turkey, in Poland, that it's in a sense an overkill. And I think that's the way out of this current predicament.
So I assume this is the last round, right? Yes. Okay, so just briefly on the question about why they are destroying institutions if they are so popular, I would agree that this is a politics of hierarchy. And there are some people for whom hierarchies are reassuring. But I would add that this is a popular program for many people in relation to what other parties are offering. And again, I'd like to get back to the issue of who is a transformative force. So it's relationally popular, but if you look at, and I think Poland is somewhat of an exception, but once these reactionary or revolutionary conservatives govern, they very much implement these hierarchies, also in terms of social and economic culture hierarchies, and many people suffer from that. So how does Trump govern is not something that majority of Americans is in their interest. So how Orban is governing is the same issue. So they rightly fear, in some sense, that if there are strong trade unions, they would be able to politicize social disillusionment with the way in which they reduce taxes for business elites and high-income citizens, but introduce policies that hurt lower-income citizens. So I think that's part of the story, to kind of stabilize this hierarchical fix of the crisis of the global system that we have, to a certain degree, requires a reduction of democracy. And this just makes it even more important to have the right kind of counter offer. And this is to answer your question briefly. I think it has to come in three dimensions. One, there has to be an ideology or a program that has to be transformative. And I'm really happy about the word home, because 15 years ago in Hungary, there was this question asked to, back then I was still a politician, how you would define the left. And I used the term home, borrowing from the Folksam from Sweden, how the politics of home, where everyone should feel belonging and cared for, not just economically, but also socially and culturally, in terms of identity as a country that is ours, our home. So I think that could be a nice narrative to link that, but it has to be also a set of policies that results in a really truly transformative institutional change on the magnitude of the New Deal. So you had a system that was absolutely self-destructive by the end of the 19th century, early 20th centuries. It required a fundamental restructuring of political economy. I think this is the kind of scale of transformation that we would have to that we have to have. Second, it has to also come in symbolic politics in terms of not being, dismissive of these people's concerns. I'm talking about all they talk about the deplorables, or in Eastern Europe, there was this famous Polish sociologist talking about civilizational incompetence. A horrendous term, I would say. It's coming from the same condescending elitism, right? We need to forget about that. And finally, there needs to be also an organizational answer in terms of getting from this cartel or business party model back to the social embedding of politics, also in terms of organizations. And if you look at the radical right mobilization in Hungary, was very much rooted in rural communities, and the way Fidesz managed to compete with the radical right was also through these organized civic circles that managed to establish itself as a party even among working class Hungarians that were not really very much supportive of left-wing or right-wing politics. So you needed that kind of organizational embedding. So I think you need to kind of re-democratize democratic politics also organizationally. You need to have the kind of the right policy answers, and you need to relearn a symbolic political language that is culturally also kind of inclusive and not elitist and exclusionary.
Thank you very much. I'll go to the homeless question, because one of the, in my view, legacy of the end of history thinking was that we don't ask any more the question, is there a certain type of a cultural or economic preconditions for liberal democracy? There was a time when people were talking how much income you should have, the classical modernization theory. I don't have this in mind. I have in mind that there is a major transformations going on that is really destabilizing the understanding both of individual and community. I'll start with something that probably, if you have not noticed, you're going to enjoy. So basically during the meeting in Beijing, recently between the Russian and the Chinese leader, they kept the microphone open, so people heard what they have been talking about. And they have been talking about not the wars in Ukraine or in Gaza. They were not talking about the tariffs of Trump. They were talking about immortality. That if there are going to be transplantation of organs, if there are going to be certain breakthrough in the biotechnologies, we are going to live up to 150 years, probably not all of us, but some of us. I'm saying this because all our politics was based on certain cultural assumptions, and one of them was that individual is mortal, and the nation is immortal. And this is why through family, through religion, through the nation, you're fighting mortality. And now what we are discovering is that at least some could end up immortal. Nation starts to look mortal, particularly small nations. Nobody can give me a guarantee that they're going to be Bulgarian nation in 100 years. And this creates a very strong, this sense of homelessness is much bigger. I do believe people on the left, now there is a lot of talk about housing crisis. And listen, one of the easiest ways to be homeless is not to have a house. And this is important. But this type of a cultural homelessness, you're never going to be back where it was. But it does not mean that people does not need a space which is bounded solidarity, in which they feel relaxed. Some years ago, I was basically giving some course in Columbia University, and you know, there was this absolutely American hysteria about trigger warning and so on. And being who I am, I said, I cannot understand how students who every day travel with the New York Metro need a trigger warning on books. They're much scared if they use the metro. And I'm saying this because we created certain type of a cultural reality which people don't feel secure. Are politicians going to come to this? Listen, most of the liberal politicians are trying to neutralize the right and try to get certain issues out of them. Talking, for example, about Poland. When it comes to borders, basically Tusk was as tough on borders as Kaczynski, and of course the situation of the existential threat coming from Russia make it easier for him to do it. It's not about this. You're never going to outdo the right on their own issues, but on the other side to believe that you can ignore these issues and to reduce the anti-migration sentiment simply to racism and so on is also wrong. And this is wrong because try to understand what really people insecurity comes from, and in some level it comes from technologies. It's about basically where we are going to work. But secondly, it comes from the fact that I'm living in the world that I don't understand anymore. And this is my last point. Democracy is based on very special equality, equality of experience. Listen, you're probably much smarter than me and much richer than me. but my experience is as equal as yours. And I'm the only spokesperson of my experience. And my vote is based on my experience. But suddenly, I'm pushed to be asked to answer questions which are totally unrelated to my experience. Listen, I'm asked to answer a question about AI. What do I really know about AI? And this is more and more issues like this. And this kind of a level that my experience is irrelevant anymore, in my view, create a certain level of anxiety, which was captured. And this is why right-wing politicians are rewarded not when they solve issues, simply when they indicate that they feel about the issue at the same time, the same way like their voters do. This is why Meloni was not punished by her voters of not stopping migration. But at the same time, basically, the Greens in Germany were punished, regardless of the fact that they have managed, by the way, to reduce quite a lot of the carbon footprint. And this kind of asymmetry between left and right is also part of the situation that we have. Yeah, thank you.
May I just take 1 minute? Would that be okay? I'll be very quick, because referring to a point that you just made, I just would like to clarify that if I caused any misunderstanding, I don't think anybody here would claim that populism is inherently anti-democratic. I think we are all aware that the problems that we are dealing today has more to do with autocracy and authoritarianism than with populism. But all these anti-democratic, undemocratic practices, hollowing out institutions and capturing of media, changing the entire information flow, changing institutions, is one thing, and wrapping all this up in a nice populist bag and stating that what you're doing what you're doing on behalf of people, in the name of the people, I think it changes the way we react to these actions, both on the supply and demand side of politics. To wrap up, it seems like it's not going to be soon that we will see populists locked out of office. And we have a very long list of things to do, both before and after that office is taken back from them permanently. But I would like to thank you all for your brilliant insights and for this rich conversation, and you all for your contributions. And with that, I would like to hand the floor back to the organizers for the next panel. Thank you.